talking with people about how to have a great retirement. This is the Rock Your Retirement Show. We don't talk about money, but we talk about almost everything else you need to rock your retirement. Now, here's your host, Kathe Kline.
Well, a lot of times people don't want to talk about this, but we're going to be talking about what happens after you die. So David Edee, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about estate planning.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Kathe and Barb. And it's not so much after you die, is leading up to it, the conversations that you need to have that most people will either avoid or procrastinate.
I think most of us avoid because we think that if we talk about dying, that means we're going to die, which doesn't make any sense because we all going to die.
And that's the problem. Most people, actually, it's not even the question of, well, I'm going to avoid it. Well, then they'll say, oh, I'm going to talk about it later. I'll talk about it later. And then there's some people who take the position, well, I'll be dead. What difference will it make? There are those people who have that mindset as well. So I like to talk about the reason why you want to have those conversations so that you leave a legacy and you don't leave a legacy in a mess. And I'm going to say that a whole bunch of times during this conversation, because as much as we don't want to talk about it, we have to make sure that we don't leave our families disorganized and in chaos. How I sort of fell into this is that I was sitting in a courtroom and I was listening to a judge and two lawyers talk about my parents' assets that we didn't end up holding on to. And I lost my parents within a year of each other from cancer. And it wasn't only just the grief of losing my parents, but also what it took, the toll it took on our family, the estate. It took us 7 years, 10 court appearances, and $50,000 in lawyers' fees to settle their estate. And all that stress led me to have a health crisis. I ended up having triple bypass surgery. When I was going through all of these tough times and the legal battles, I came to the realization that my family, and like most families, were so utterly unprepared. It's not like we were only unprepared for following the will of my parents and their wishes, but we're the unwillingness that most people have to confront the inevitability of death and the loss. And we had that problem, the loss of losing our parents and everything that goes with it. And the problem is that this story is happening in a lot of families. We've already started to talk about it. It's a subject that no one wants to talk about because if we talk about it, we think that the losses become a reality. And when we have this sort of silence, this is where the problem starts. And I'm sure both of you know of families that have damaging family fights because there was no talking. But I like to do now in my work is to get people to break that cycle of silence so that we can think about, talk about, prepare for death in an easier way so that we don't leave our families disorganized and in chaos.
I just think this is so timely for me, David, because I have a 90-year-old dad and an 88-year-old mother-in-law that are still with us, and having these conversations with them is hard enough, right? But I'm in my 60s and I live in an over 55 community, and there, of course, are people dying all around me, right? We call our neighborhood heaven's waiting room because there's an ambulance that comes in. Because I mean, when you have people in their 70s and 80s, stuff happens. Talking to countless widows or recent widows, this is a very, very important topic. And so for my part, the process I'm in right now is we've always had a will. We're one of those few percent of people that had a will when our children were young. But recently our financial planner said, it's been about 11 years since you updated your will. Some things have changed for your children. Their financial situation is improved. You've sold your major asset and moved to a new community, and your funds are growing. So it might be time to talk to someone about the options of whether you should do a trust or whether you should just update your will. But I can tell you one of the other reasons people don't do this is it requires you to not just talk about it with your family, that's important, but to actually take action. And to take action, you have to make a decision. And to make a decision, you have to research and have information and figure things out like, do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Where do you want to be? And sure, if you're dead, your kids will take care of it. But wouldn't it be nice if the decisions were made, communicated, maybe even prepaid? And so we were just talking today. My daughter's coming up and I thought, oh, we need to go down to the bank and get her name on our checking account, same as our son, so that they're not in the position like it sounds like you were, where if those arrangements haven't been made, your parent passes and you got to take money out of your own accounts to start the process, to get the death certificates, to do that. And it's like, wait a second, why should they have to do that? So I am excited to hear what you're going to say because it's so relevant to me. We have a meeting at the end of the month with an attorney to figure this out. So talk me through it.
One thing we all can agree on, everybody has a story, and we know other people who are going through this situation here. But the problem is that we as baby boomers, we're approaching the subject the same way our parents did. There wasn't a lot of talking. When it came to money, there wasn't a lot of conversations of what's going on. Everything has been held kind of secretly. And when something happens, then the family has to deal with it. So what I'm, again, trying to help people to break that cycle of silence is that we have to not only do the preparation in terms of doing the planning, because I'm here in Canada, but the same problem is in the US. There's over 125 million Canadian and Americans who don't even have a will. So over the next 10 years, there's expected to be about $2 trillion going to be passed on to the next generation. So wow. There's a whole lot of problems going on. You've got people who have wills that haven't been updated and they haven't had conversations with their family, or there's people who don't have any wills and they would rather leave it intestate and die intestate and let the government be their executor, which we know the government's got your best interest at.
Right, exactly. And what about the multiples of marriages that people tend to have these days?
Absolutely. So as you can see, there's so many angles and problems that can arise, but it's going to have to start with people coming to the realization that they want to make sure that they don't leave a legacy and a mess, which means they're going to do the things to make sure that the next generation is going to have a little or no disorganization and not leave them in chaos, which is going to start with having a will and making sure that you pick an executor. When you choose an executor, that's the biggest favor you're asking someone to do for you, because you're asking someone to spend at least 100 hours or spend anywhere 18 to 24 months to settle your estate. And so not only just having to deal with the tax department and all the over 100, 200 items that they have to take care of to settle the estate, they also have to deal with beneficiaries who are only interested in their inheritance. And they're not interested in the problems that you have with the government because you haven't filed the right tax return, because you as the executor, you're being held liable. So, you've got to deal with that as possible. And on top of that, if you're the family member, most likely the first person that's asked to be an executor is going to be a family member. You're also dealing with the grief. So in my book, Executor Help, all this other stuff that we're going to be talking about, that's the business side. But what you want to do first is to handle the grief, because people handle grief differently and it's going to affect you. In my case, the stress, like I said before, ended me up in the hospital. So the first thing we have to do is to come to realization that I need to make changes. I need to get a will. I need to have a power of attorney. I need to prepare my executor, because you're leaving them to do all the work that you're not going to be here to do. So you got to prepare them. So there's a myriad of things that you need to be doing. And the most important thing is to have the conversations with the family. And every family, I like to say, is messy, because I'm sure we've all got that one or two people in our family that we know when something goes bad, something's going to go awry, that they're going to make a scene. They're going to make it about them. I see you both nodding. Yes. Every family has at least one. I had one. That's how I ended up in court for 7 years. So you also have to understand that the importance of having those conversations so that those particular troubled individuals, these sort of narcissists, so to speak, are going to be dealt with, that there's no surprises, that they know what your wishes are. So you want to have those conversations, because far too often people will say, well, yeah, I've got a will, but that's as far as it goes. They don't want to hurt people's feelings by having conversations and say, well, this is what I want done, and this person's the executor. I've chosen this child over the other child to be the executor, or I put money in a trust because I don't think you could handle the money, that sort of thing. And they're afraid of hurting people's feelings. But you need to have the conversations in advance so that there's no misunderstanding going forward.
Well, I think that's incredibly important because families can get broken, right? Where they're not celebrating holidays and that sort of thing anymore. I had a grandfather and my mother passed, and I basically got disinherited. Not that I think he meant to, but he left everything to my mom's two sisters and we got nothing. You know, it was just like there wasn't even an acknowledgement because she had passed. And I said, but doesn't it go to the next generations? And they're like, no, it can go either way. So it needs to be specific in your will. And I'm not sure at the time his will was written that he even knew, because it was being handled by the living sisters. And so I think you're right. It's part doing the work, but it's also talking about it and talking about the why. Otherwise, you're just left going, I don't understand why or how that happened. And it's kind of left unresolved. Now, we've reconciled the family, but it was a rough patch for a while when we were going, what do you mean? So I really applaud your having those hard conversations. And it's kind of like, well, when do you have them, right? When you're on death's door, when you're healthy, there's no good time, obviously, but maybe you could talk about what's the checklist of things you talk about? Like, where do you start? It isn't just about the money or your memorial service or the burial. Like, what are some steps that you could do to keep conversations healthy?
Well, first, once you've decided you're going to have a family meeting, is that you have to understand it's not going to be just one time and we're done. It's never going to, because people, again, are going to be uncomfortable. They're not going to be wanting to talk about it. In my case, my parents and how we ended up in court, me being a financial advisor for over 40 years, my parents didn't have the conversation with us. I mean, they were in my office. They met with our estate planning lawyer. They did up the will. And usually I would sit in with clients because a lot of times they're uncomfortable. They don't understand the terms. So I'm there as a buffer. That day when my parents came into my office, I wasn't in the room because I couldn't fathom talking about them no longer being here. So, I mean, I knew what was in the will, and they never told us it should be, even though the will's for it to be split three ways, and you figure equal should be fair. We had one sibling who wouldn't agree to that, and that's how we ended up in court. So it has to start with you having the conversations. Now, you get together at Thanksgiving or Christmas. At the dinner table, it's not to say, you know what, I've changed my will and I'm leaving you out of it, pass the gravy. You can't do that. So that's just one way we could stay away from. What I suggest is to wait maybe a day or so, or after, maybe if there's been drinking going on, maybe not, that's not the time to bring it up. Maybe the next day. Again, how families are messy. So if you know the individuals that you're going to be dealing with, you want to have a clear mind when you have that conversation, and just start to say, you know what, I have just updated my will and all my estate plans, and I just want to let you know how I expect things to go. I don't expect that there should be any fighting because I've chosen Joe as my executor, and the reason I chose Joe is blah, 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 blah. There might be other people in the room who are another child or something that, because, well, why'd you pick them? If you know that, and you have to explain why you picked Joe. Then you're going to say, you know what, at my funeral, I want it to be easy. I want it to be, et cetera, et cetera. So you just bring up the points. There's going to be kids, and I know adult children who don't want to hear their parents talking about this. They'll get up and leave the room. Why you want to be so morbid? It's the holiday stuff of that. You need to have these conversations. Intensive care is no place to find out that there's no will, and you can never have a meaningful conversation with anybody when they're on a respirator. So now is the time to have a conversation.
I would not want to be somebody's executor.
It's the worst job that you could have. People take on the responsibility because they think it's a great honor. But the 95, 99% of most people, they have absolutely no idea what they're about to get into. And you're right, the return on investment in terms of your time is never going to come back. So you really don't know about somebody until you have to share an inheritance with them. Believe me, I know. It's people, when I was talking about being in the courtroom, I remember that day, and that's how the idea sort of came up for my book, is that I remember sitting in the courtroom, and I don't know, I had an out-of-body experience, and I'm saying, I don't remember this judge or two, I don't know, speaking in the third term in my head, I don't remember this judge or these two lawyers ever being at the Christmas table. I don't remember having them handing me the cranberry. Who are these people? My parents are spitting in their grave, and we're paying these people to argue over my parents' stuff. This made no sense to me. But every day we have courts in the US and Canada are filled with families fighting over farms, businesses, cottages. I talked to a mediator when I was doing the research for my book, and he was saying before there would be family fights and people being in court because the parents had passed away. Now what's happened is, again, because of inheritors, beneficiaries, they feel self-entitled. They're now taking the parents to court while they're alive to sue them because they'll say, you know what, you're spending too much of my inheritance. Why are you going on those vacations? This is happening all the time. Why are you going on these vacations?
No.
Yes.
Okay. So you've raised some pretty entitled children, I guess, would be my answer to that. Okay, so let's go back to Barb's question about more of a step-by-step thing. So I've written down you need a will, you need a power of attorney, you need to prepare the executor, and I would prepare them that this might not be a fun job, and have multiple discussions with your downline, also known as your heirs. So are there anything else that people should be doing now?
As you're preparing your executor, you also want to help them be organized. So that means you've got everything in one place. So you've got the will, the power of attorney, a net worth statement or your statement of investments, all of those things in a brightly colored envelope, I like to say, because when there's a death, people are traumatized, and you can't find nothing when you're in trauma. You can't find, well, I know it's here somewhere, but if you prepare your executor, say, if something happens, look for the bright orange envelope or the bright red envelope, you will find everything that you're going to need in there. The other thing that needs to be in there are your digital assets, which means your logins and the passwords. Most people don't think about that. For every one email address, there's at least 160 digital identities related to those email addresses. So you've got your online banking, you've got Amazon, Netflix, all of the different subscriptions you've got going on, monthly things going through. If your executor or someone doesn't have access to those logins and passwords, then they'll just go on forever, especially when it comes to social media. Each social media company has its own protocol to shut down the accounts. A friend of mine, Linda, she passed away 3 years ago to cancer, and I could tell that her executor, her husband, doesn't know the logins and passwords because recently her birthday came up on Facebook, and recently her work anniversary came up on LinkedIn. So they don't know how to shut them down. So you need to have all your logins and passwords to be part of that package of your will, your power of attorney, life insurance policies, your pension plans, everything that's important that the executor is going to need. Make it as easy as possible for them. Also, if, as you're setting up the estate, maybe there's a lawyer who drew up the will. You want to have their name handy in that envelope. You want to have the name of someone who does your taxes or an accountant to help the executor file the tax return. You also want to have the name of the financial advisor that you've been dealing with. Make it as easy as possible for the executor to do the job because they're going to be overwhelmed and they're going to be traumatized.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about what a gift my dad's wife, my mom passed away, and then he married another person, and she is consummate organized. And what I have up in my little safe is a letter, and it has all the information of how to get a hold of the attorney. And then they've already bought their plot, their casket, where all that will go. And I'm a co-executor with her son and my dad. I'm the oldest daughter. And at first, when she handed it to me, I said, really? And she updates it every time they go on a trip where they fly to Europe for like 3 or 4 weeks. So it's always updated. When you were talking about the orange folder or the bright folder, what I was thinking, as you said, it's hard to find things. And unless my son knows where the key is to my safe, which he should, I think there should be 2 folders, one in your possession, and then one given to the child or the executor or whoever it is that has it with all this information, but kept up to date. Now, the password one is tricky for me, David, because they've started this new thing for people like us that can't remember our password, and it's called facial recognition. So now I don't even know my passwords because they've been updated with strong password, right? On the app. So they're all in my phone. And I keep telling my husband, it's like, okay, if I die, you need to put this on my face while I'm dead so you can at least get the phone open. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to manage these passwords, because we used to have them all. And my kids would go, Mom, you can't have them in a folder on your computer marked passwords.
Well, I don't know, David, you can tell me if this works or not, but I use a password saver called LastPass. There's other password savers, 1Pass, there's a ton of them. But LastPass allows you to give somebody an unlock key if they can't reach you like for 2 days. So my sister has the ability to get access to all of my passwords if she can't reach me, and basically, or if I can't respond. And basically, LastPass will send me an email, and if I don't respond to it within the 48 hours, they will open the account to her.
Wow.
And
I need to check into that.
Now, you obviously want to fully trust the person that you give that kind of access to. But that's the way that I've dealt with the password issue. And I don't know, David, do you have a different way of dealing with that?
That's a good way as well. I would just say, for example, something happens to you and something happens to your sister who has the LastPass. What's the next level? Where are we going?
Right.
I haven't thought that far ahead. My husband and her, that's it. That's all I have right now.
Well, if anything, if it's possible, then in that bright orange folder with everything else, put that LastPass, how to get in there. But I mean, the first line of defense would be your sister. But if, say, for example, your sister can't get to it, then everything is still going to be locked up. You just want to make it as easier for whoever you're leaving behind to have access to it. Everything we're talking about here, this is the greatest gift of love that you can do for somebody, that you're taking the time to make sure that when they're going to be grieving, that they're not going to be overwhelmed, and that you've made it as easy as possible for them to make sure that all your wishes that aren't going to be misunderstood, and to make sure that everything that you wanted to be done is going to be done the way you want it. You're not leaving anything to guesswork.
Agreed. Well, it's interesting too that sometimes there's a transition period between where you are now and death. And that's when you've got like dementia or Alzheimer's. When we moved, we right-sized and we purged a ton of stuff. I think it's called a Swedish death purge. And I think that as I am listening to some of my neighbors whose parents are in their 80s and 90s, they're not being left a gift. They are being left a millstone of a home of 40 years that hasn't been maintained, that is so full of stuff. And just the trauma of having to move the family into assisted care, the husband and wife, pay the bills, and then they've got all this stuff to deal with. And so I think you're at the top, you said be organized. You should choose someone who's organized. But I think it's incumbent on us. We are the ones who need to be organized and then give it to an organized person. And we need to organize our life so that we're not leaving them a mess, because we couldn't decide what we wanted to keep or get rid of. Because I can guarantee all that stuff went to the Goodwill or the dump. All those treasures that this one friend that her mom or mother-in-law and father-in-law had, she goes, I got to get rid of it. I got to sell the house. I need the money to pay for their care. So, wow, eye-opening. Give us some hope here, David. It's feeling kind of heavy right now.
It's not that heavy. Again, spoiler alert, it's going to happen to all of us. All we're doing is try to make this as easy as possible. Statistically, it says that 70% of inheritance don't make it to the third generation. because
Oh,
it becomes a mess for one generation. They do get it, but the next generation doesn't prepare. So the third generation is going to be left with little or nothing from their grandparents, et cetera. So it is a heavy topic. This is the least sexiest topic I'm sure you ladies have talked about on this show. So just bring it up. And I was watching both of you. Each of you know of a story. Each of you know that you've got somebody in your family that could be a mess that's going to give trouble. So if just the three of us right here can agree and know of people, everybody that's listening to us is going through the exact same thing. Unfortunately, it's a small few of people that are going to take the time to make sure, no, I don't want to leave a legacy and a mess. I want to make sure that I do the right things. You want to be remembered for the things that you did do, not what you didn't do. So do the best that you can and be organized and start the conversations. And don't be afraid to have the conversations. Are they uncomfortable? Absolutely. But you need to have them. And another thing I've done is that I wrote part of my will is I've written legacy letters. I've written to my son. And in that, they'll open it up, but he got it last Christmas, but it's something that he'll hold on to. It talked about what I think of him as a man, as a parent, some funny stories and stuff like that. There are a lot of good books out there on how to write legacy letters. And now I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, Penelope, and now I'm going to write her a legacy letter. I don't know how long I'll be around, but at least she can open it up and say that, no, that Papa thought about me. And it's not a computer written thing. It's your own handwritten notes of what you loved about them, what piece of advice that you want to leave for them. And to make them just remember you, that they'll say, you know what? My Papa loved me and he left me these letters. So along with the heavy part of you no longer being there with your will and everything else, you should also write some legacy letters to your loved ones, the people that you love.
I love that idea. That's an excellent idea. And in those letters, you could also write some, like if you have a story about a special trip that you took them on, you could talk about that trip or include some photographs or whatever in those legacy love letters. So
I think those will probably be the most important thing out of the whole thing. I mean, yes, you've got to go through the process and you've got to execute the will and you've got to do all those things. But that really is what survives death, is the memories and the words you spoke, the blessings you spoke into them. I mean, I just circled it and wrote underline, because legacy letters, while we're going to do all the mechanical and the things we need to do to get these things organized, and I'm really motivated now, but I love the legacy letters. And so you said you gave it to your son. So do you write a new one each year, or you're going to do it once and done, or how's that work?
I wrote that one and I gave it to him because he was just going through a rough time. So these young men today, they got their own little issues. And so I said, you know what, and I had read about it and learned how to write one. So I gave that to him, but I'll probably put in a new one with my will, but I'm going to write one for my granddaughter as well, because tell them stories. Your voice will always carry with them when you're no longer there. If they're having a bad day or whatever, they know they can pick up those letters and they say, you know what, my Papa wrote this to me. And that should help them through. You might have some words of wisdom or something to leave for them. Recently, I had explained to me what a legacy is. Think of it as though when you watch a movie and you see the credits going up, that's your legacy right there. What are the credits that you want them to go up say about you? What did you do? Mm-hmm. What are all the things that you've done? That's your legacy. And that's all we're trying to do. I mean, especially at our ages now as baby boomers, is that we leave a legacy where we've got our credits of that. Hopefully we've left the loved ones that we leave behind a little better, and that they're going to remember what we did do and not what we didn't do for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So speaking of legacy, when you write a book, that can be on your list of credits. So tell our listeners how to get a copy of your book, where it's at, the name of it, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Everything we've talked about, you can just go to my website, davidedee.com. The book is available at Amazon and all fine online book retailers. It's called Executor Help, How to Settle an Estate, Pick an Executor, and Avoid Family Fights. And it's just some of the things that we talked about here, especially, and I tell it in a story form. The book's written for someone who's preparing their estate or someone who's going to be asked as an executor what's involved. Again, at the back of the book, I've got 50 questions that most people ask who are executors and who want those answered. So you can go to Amazon or just go on my website. You can buy the book. I've got a legacy readiness quiz, and you can see where you stand right now, and it'll give you a point system. Everybody loves a quiz, and it'll see what you need to. You'll get the results of what you need to work on. There's a button to click. You can get a free chapter of the book. For your listening pleasure, you can get the audiobook version. It's sort of, think of it as a story time at night, me talking about executorship and estate planning.
Fantastic. So give us your website URL.
David Edee, DavidEdey.com.
Perfect. Well, David, this has been very enlightening. Thank you so much for coming on the Rock Your Retirement show today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I wish you all the best, both of you.
Thank you.
And you're going to have us be motivated. We're motivated to get this stuff done.
Exactly. And for the listener, we'll see you next time on the Rock Your Retirement show. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.